It was late October, and the rain hadn't stopped for 2 days straight. The kind of cold, steady rain that soaked into your bones, that made the air taste like metal and the ground smell like rot. I was driving back to my hometown in upstate New York after visiting a friend near Albany. The drive should have taken 4 hours, but by the time I hit the county line, it was close to midnight. The rain was coming down so hard my headlights could barely cut through it, and the narrow, winding roads made me nervous. There weren't many houses out there, just stretches of forest and old, half-collapsed barns. My wipers squeaked across the glass as thunder rolled somewhere far off. That's when I saw a light up ahead, a dim yellow glow flickering through the curtain of rain. I slowed down, thinking maybe it was a gas station or someone's porch. Instead, I saw an old diner sitting on the corner of a crossroads, the kind that looked frozen in time. There were no other cars in the lot, no neon signs humming in the windows, just that single light. I pulled in, thinking I'd grab a coffee and wait out the storm. When I stepped inside, the smell hit me first: coffee, old grease, and damp wood. The place was empty, except for a woman behind the counter, her hair gray and tied back, wearing a faded uniform. She looked up and smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Late night for traveling," she said, voice soft but strained. "Yeah," I said, shaking the rain off my jacket. "Roads are terrible. Thought I'd stop somewhere warm for a bit." She nodded and motioned toward the counter. "Sit anywhere you like. Coffee's hot." I sat, and she poured me a cup. The coffee was black, bitter, but comforting. I glanced around the place. Photos on the wall, a jukebox in the corner, booths with cracked red vinyl seats. It looked like it hadn't changed since the 1960s. "You live around here?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "Used to," she said quietly. "Not many folks come through anymore, except on nights like this." I didn't understand what she meant, but before I could ask, the bell above the door jingled. A man walked in, drenched, his clothes dark with rain. He looked like he'd been outside for a long time, his skin pale, lips almost blue. He sat 3 stools down from me without a word. The woman hesitated before approaching him. "You're back again," she said softly. The man didn't answer. He just stared down at the counter, water dripping from his sleeves, pooling beneath his hands. I glanced at him, trying to be polite, but something about him felt wrong. His eyes were completely black, not dark brown, not shadowed, just black. I looked away, my stomach tightening. The woman brought him a cup of coffee, her hands trembling slightly. "You know it doesn't change anything," she said, barely above a whisper. He didn't move, didn't drink, just sat there, water running down his face. I cleared my throat. "Hey, you okay, man?" He slowly turned toward me. The corners of his mouth twitched into something like a smile. Then he said, quietly, "You shouldn't be here." The words sent a chill straight through me. The air in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees. I turned to the woman, expecting her to tell him to leave, but she was staring at him with tears in her eyes. "It's been raining for 50 years, she whispered. "And he still won't rest." "What are you talking about?" I asked. She looked at me, eyes glassy. "That man drowned. Right down the road, car went off the bridge during a storm just like this. Happened in 1974. I laughed nervously, waiting for her to smile, but she didn't. The man stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. The sound echoed unnaturally loud. He looked at me again. "Don't drive the bridge," he said. His voice sounded far away, like it came through static. Then he was gone. Not walked out, gone. Just gone. The door didn't open, the bell didn't ring. He vanished between one blink and the next, leaving behind a puddle of muddy water where he'd been sitting. I stood up, backing away. "What the hell?" The woman was crying now. "He always comes when the rain starts. Always warns someone." "Warns them about what?" I asked. She stared at me for a long moment. "About the bridge." I didn't understand until I left the diner. The rain had eased just a little, and when I turned to look back, the diner was dark. Completely dark. The light that had drawn me in, gone. The parking lot was empty. No tire tracks but my own. I got in my car, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was exhaustion, that maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But a mile down the road, I saw the bridge she'd mentioned, a narrow wooden one spanning a fast, flooded river. The rain picked up again. Something inside me said to turn around, but I didn't. I kept driving. Halfway across, I felt the tires slip. The car fishtailed, and I slammed on the brakes. The headlights caught something through the rain, a figure standing on the other side of the bridge. It was the man from the diner, soaked, motionless. He raised a hand slowly and pointed down at the river. Before I could process it, the wood beneath the car groaned. A loud crack echoed through the storm. I threw it in reverse just as part of the bridge gave way, collapsing into the water. I barely made it back to solid ground. When I looked up again, the figure was gone. I sat there for a long time, shaking, watching the rain wash over the broken planks. If I'd driven 5 more feet, I would have gone straight into the river. When I finally made it home, I tried to tell people what happened. Nobody believed me. They said that diner burned down in the 1980s, said it hadn't existed for decades. But sometimes when it rains hard enough, I still dream about that place, the flickering light, the smell of old coffee, the woman's trembling voice. And always in the dream, the man turns to me again, his face pale, his eyes black as night. You shouldn't be here. Story the end. The rain came down hard over northern Pennsylvania that night, pounding the empty roads like 1,000 drumming hands. The storm had rolled in fast, dark clouds swallowing the last bits of daylight, thunder echoing through the valleys, and wind pushing the rain sideways. It was the kind of storm that made even locals stay off the back roads. But Ethan Parker was in a hurry. He had just finished a long day of deliveries for his small construction company. He dropped off the last load near Lake Cheston and was heading back home to his apartment 2 towns over. Normally he'd have taken the main interstate, but flooding had shut it down, so he took a detour through an old mountain road called Black Hollow Way, a winding, narrow stretch barely used anymore. It was close to midnight. The only light came from the headlights slicing through the rain. The forest on both sides pressed close, thick with wet pine and fog. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up, and the sound of rain drumming on the roof filled the cab. Ethan turned the radio on, but all he got was static. He sighed, muttered, "Figures," and kept driving. He had about 15 miles to go when he saw something up ahead, a car on the side of the road, hazard lights blinking through the storm. He slowed, squinting through the rain. The car was an old red sedan, half sunk into the muddy shoulder. Its driver's side door was open, swinging slightly in the wind. Ethan hesitated. The road was slick, and it wasn't exactly safe to stop, but leaving someone stranded out there in that storm didn't feel right either. He pulled over a few feet ahead and turned on his flashers. When he got out, the rain hit him like cold nails. He jogged to the car, boots splashing through puddles. "Hello?" he called. "You okay in there?" No answer. He leaned closer. The car was empty. Driver's seat, passenger seat, back seat. No one. The headlights were still on, the engine off, keys dangling from the ignition. A purse sat on the front seat, half open. He frowned. "Hello?" he shouted again. His voice disappeared into the sound of the storm. He was about to turn back when he noticed footprints in the mud. Bare footprints, leading away from the car and down toward the trees. Ethan hesitated. They were small, like a woman's. He followed them with his flashlight, the beam trembling slightly in the wind. The prints led down a small slope toward the edge of the woods, then vanished where the rain had washed them away. "Damn it," he muttered. He called out again. "Miss, you out here?" Nothing. Just the sound of wind through wet leaves. He was about to head back when something flickered at the edge of his light, a shape moving between the trees. "Hey," he called. "Are you hurt?" The figure stopped. For a moment, it stood completely still. Then, slowly, it turned toward him. It was a woman. She was barefoot, wearing what looked like a nightgown, soaked and clinging to her body. Her long black hair hung over her face. Even from a distance, something about the way she moved made Ethan's skin crawl. She didn't run or wave for help. She just stared. "Are you okay?" he asked again, stepping closer. She tilted her head slightly, the movement sharp and unnatural. Ethan's stomach tightened. He took a cautious step back. "All right, I'll call someone, okay? Just stay there." He turned toward his truck and froze. She was suddenly closer. She hadn't run, she hadn't made a sound, but she was now standing on the edge of the ditch only 10 feet away, rain pouring over her face. Her eyes were black, like the pupils had swallowed everything. Ethan stumbled back. "Jesus Christ," she whispered something, her voice barely audible over the storm. "You stopped." He swallowed hard. "What?" "You shouldn't have stopped." The wind howled. The rain felt colder. Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears. He backed away slowly, keeping his eyes on her, then turned and bolted toward the truck. When he yanked the door open, his hands were shaking so badly he fumbled the keys. He looked in the side mirror and saw nothing. She was gone. He jammed the key into the ignition and floored it. The tires spun in the mud before catching traction. He drove fast, headlights bouncing off the wet pavement. His breathing was ragged, every instinct screaming to get out of those woods. For a while, nothing happened, just the rain and the occasional flash of lightning. He kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her there. He finally let out a shaky laugh, trying to convince himself he was overreacting. Probably just someone lost out here, he muttered, but then he heard it. Then a faint, steady tapping from the back of the truck. Tap! Tap! He gripped the wheel tighter. No, he whispered. The tapping grew louder. He checked the mirror again. Nothing but darkness. Then a loud bang shook the truck like something had slammed into the tailgate. He hit the brakes. The engine sputtered, the headlights flickering. He sat there, breath held, listening. The rain slowed slightly, enough that he could hear his own heartbeat. Another bang. Then footsteps. Wet, slow, dragging footsteps on the road behind him. Ethan's chest tightened. He turned the key, desperate to start the engine again. It coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. He slammed the accelerator. The tires squealed, flinging mud. He didn't stop until he saw the lights of the next town appear through the rain. When he finally pulled into the gas station off Route 9, he was shaking so hard he could barely open the door. The attendant looked at him like he'd seen a ghost. "You okay, man?" the guy asked. Ethan nodded weakly. There's someone back there, on Black Hollow Way." The attendant frowned. "You sure? Nobody goes out that way during storms." "Not since the accident." Ethan blinked. "What accident?" The man leaned on the counter, lowering his voice. "About 10 years ago. Girl crashed her car on that road. They found it in almost the same spot you're talking about. Her body was never recovered. They searched the woods for days. Locals say she still walks that road when it rains, trying to flag someone down." Ethan's face went pale. No, I saw her. She talked to me." The attendant's expression didn't change. "Then I guess she finally found you." Ethan left the gas station shaking, drenched in cold sweat. He checked the back of his truck before getting in. Nothing there but puddles and mud. He tried to convince himself it was all some strange coincidence, that the mind played tricks in the rain. That night, he barely slept. He kept hearing the tapping, sometimes faint, sometimes closer. When morning came, he went out to check the truck again. The rain had stopped. The sun peeked weakly through gray clouds. He opened the tailgate and froze. There, pressed into the wet mud that had splashed up inside, were two small perfect footprints. Bare footprints. He slammed it shut and backed away, heart pounding. For the next few days, Ethan tried to forget. He didn't tell anyone else, though he avoided that road completely. But every time it rained, the tapping came back, sometimes on his window, sometimes on the roof. Always steady, always waiting. A week later, his neighbor found his truck parked outside his apartment complex, engine still running. The driver's door was open, rain pouring in. The seat was empty, but there were wet footprints leading away from the car, bare footprints that stopped right at the edge of the road and vanished into the pavement. Now, when storms roll through that part of Pennsylvania, truckers talk about a man and a woman seen walking together along Black Hollow Way, both barefoot, both drenched, both staring blankly into the rain. If you stop for them, they say, you'll never make it out. Story the end. It had been raining since morning. A relentless, cold October rain that soaked through everything. The kind of rain that makes even familiar roads feel strange. I was on my way from Columbus, Ohio to visit my sister in Pittsburgh, taking the back roads because I'd always preferred quiet drives over busy highways. But by nightfall, I regretted that choice. The rain had turned into a storm. Lightning flashed every few minutes, and thunder rolled so low it vibrated the steering wheel. I hadn't seen another car in almost 40 minutes. The GPS signal was gone, and the radio had turned into static. The only sound was the wipers dragging back and forth across the glass, squeaking every few seconds. I tried to hum to keep myself calm, but it didn't help. Around 9:30, my gas light came on. I cursed quietly, squinting through the rain to see if there was any sign of a gas station. A green sign appeared ahead, Keller Township, 7 miles. I exhaled in relief, just wanting to find somewhere dry. But the storm kept getting worse. The road curved sharply, and my headlights caught something ahead, something lying in the middle of the street. I slammed on the brakes. It was a car, or what was left of one. The front end was smashed, the hood bent upward, and the driver's door was wide open. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, rain hammering the roof. There was no movement, no one waving for help, just the wrecked car and the flicker of its hazard lights through the downpour. I should have called 911, but I didn't have service. I thought about driving around it, but the road was too narrow. So, reluctantly, I grabbed my jacket and stepped into the rain. It was freezing. I had to shout to hear my own voice. Hello? Anybody there? No answer. I moved closer, careful not to slip. The car was empty. The driver's seat was wet, like someone had just been there, but there was no one in sight. I looked around with my flashlight, scanning the woods on either side of the road. That's when I saw the footprints. Bare footprints, heading away from the car into the woods. Something about them didn't look right. The toes were too long, almost claw-like, and each step was deep, like whoever made them was dragging their feet. The wind howled through the trees, making the branches sway. For a moment, I thought I saw movement just beyond the tree line, a shape, pale and slow-moving. But when I blinked, it was gone. A sudden loud noise, metal scraping, made me whirl around. The car door had shut by itself. That was enough for me. I ran back to my truck, jumped in, locked the doors, and drove around the wreck, tires splashing through deep puddles. My heart was pounding so hard that my chest hurt. As I drove, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone or something standing in the middle of the road behind me. But all I saw was rain. About 15 minutes later, I spotted lights ahead, a gas station, glowing faintly through the storm. It looked old, like it hadn't been updated in decades, but it was open. I pulled in, still shaking, and ran inside. There was an older man behind the counter reading a newspaper. He looked up at me, squinting. "Rough weather out there." "You could say that," I said, catching my breath. "There's a wreck back on the road a few miles west. Looked bad." The man's eyes narrowed. "Old blue sedan?" "Yeah," I said, surprised. "How'd you know?" He folded the newspaper slowly. "That car's been out there for years." I froze. "That's not possible. I just saw it. The lights were flashing." He shook his head. "They say on nights like this, when the rain's hard enough, it shows up again. The driver never made it out of the woods." I laughed, but it came out shaky. "You're telling me it's haunted?" He didn't smile. "You didn't see anyone, did you?" "No," I said quietly. "But there were footprints." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "If you saw the prints, you need to leave. Now." "What?" "Don't stay in Keller Township. Don't stop. Don't look back," he said. His tone wasn't joking. Before I could reply, a loud bang came from outside, metal hitting metal. The lights flickered. The old man's face went pale. "He followed you," he whispered. I turned toward the window, heart pounding. Through the sheets of rain, I could see my truck and a figure standing beside it. At first, it looked like a man in soaked clothes, head tilted downward. But then he started to move. Not walking, not limping, just gliding, like his feet weren't touching the ground. His arms hung limp at his sides, and as he raised his head, I could see his face through the glass. His eyes were black, not empty, just pools of dark water reflecting the lights of the station. His mouth opened slightly, but there was no sound. The lights inside flickered again, and when they came back on, he was gone. I didn't wait to see if he'd return. I ran to the truck, threw open the door, and peeled out of that gas station so fast the tires squealed on the wet concrete. I didn't look in the mirrors, didn't slow down, didn't even breathe right. I just drove. But a few miles later, I couldn't resist. I glanced in the rear view. He was there. Sitting in the bed of my truck, barely visible through the rain, head bowed like before. His hair dripped dark water onto the glass. I slammed on the brakes, heart racing, but when I turned around, the bed was empty. For the next 20 miles, I drove with one eye on the mirror, whispering to myself to stay calm. I didn't see him again that night. But when I finally made it to Pittsburgh, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. On the back window of my truck, just below the wiper, was a single wet handprint, too large to be mine. I tried to wash it off, but even after the rain stopped, it wouldn't fade for days. A few weeks later, my sister sent me a local article she'd found online. Unsolved mystery, the Keller Township wreck. The story said a man named Richard Hall had crashed his car on that same road in 1987. Witnesses claimed he got out of the vehicle and vanished into the woods before rescue arrived. They found his footprints too, bare, deep, and strange. Some locals said on stormy nights, drivers still see his car, still see him walking the road, still hear the sound of his footsteps in the rain. Every time I drive at night and the rain starts to fall, I feel that old fear creep back in. And sometimes, when the storm's just right, I swear I can hear something wet and heavy dragging along the pavement behind me. Story, the end. It was raining so hard that night it sounded like gravel being thrown against the windows. The kind of rain that makes you feel isolated, like the whole world beyond your house has disappeared. I remember sitting on the couch in my small rental cabin, tucked away deep in the mountains of western North Carolina, wondering if the power would go out. It was late, past midnight, and the storm had been rolling for hours, shaking the trees outside and making the wind whistle through the cracks in the old wood. I had only been living there for a few weeks. I'd taken the place because it was cheap and quiet, a perfect retreat while I finished a freelance project that required focus. The landlord, a quiet older man named Hal, warned me about how rough it could get during fall storms. "The rain up here don't come easy," he said when I moved in, "and it brings strange things with it sometimes. Sounds, shapes, best to stay inside when it hits." At the time, I laughed it off. But that night, those words wouldn't leave my head. The rain hadn't stopped all day, and by the time night came, it was almost deafening. The small stream behind the cabin had swollen into a muddy, churning river, and the trees bent under the wind. Every few minutes, lightning would light up the room in a flash of blue-white, followed by the rolling growl of thunder that made the glass panes tremble. I had my laptop open on the table trying to work, but my internet kept cutting out. Around 12:45, it dropped again, and my phone lost its signal completely. I sighed, stood up, and went to the window to look outside. The yard was a sheet of water, puddles forming where the grass dipped. The light from the porch bulb flickered in the downpour, making the shadows twitch and bend. And then I saw it, someone walking up the road. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it, but no. There was a person out there, walking slowly along the edge of the flooded dirt path that led past my driveway. They didn't have a flashlight, no umbrella, nothing. Just walking in that heavy rain like they didn't even feel it. I leaned closer to the window, squinting. It was hard to tell through the storm, but it looked like a man. Tall, wearing a coat or maybe some kind of hooded jacket. His head was tilted down, and his steps were strange, deliberate, slow, but uneven, like he was dragging one leg slightly behind the other. He didn't look up, didn't react to the thunder, just kept moving through the floodwater. It gave me a chill, but I told myself he was probably some hiker caught in the weather. The mountains drew all kinds of campers and wanderers. Still, I couldn't shake the unease as I watched him pass my driveway. He didn't. Instead, he stopped, right at the end of it. I froze. He stood there for a long time, maybe 20 seconds, motionless in the rain. The porch light flickered again, and I thought I saw his face, or at least the faint shape of it under the hood. He seemed to be staring straight toward the cabin. Another flash of lightning lit the sky, and for that split second, he was closer. I jumped back, heart pounding. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, the rain, the shadows. I tried to convince myself of that, but when I looked again, he was gone. I shut the curtains. I sat back down at the table, telling myself I was just tired. I'd barely slept in days, and the storm was playing tricks on me. I tried to focus on my work again, but every few minutes I found myself glancing toward the window. That's when I heard the first knock. It was faint, barely audible over the rain. 3 slow, deliberate knocks against the front door. I froze, my pulse jumping into my throat. I waited, thinking maybe it had been the wind, but then it came again, louder this time. 3 distinct knocks. I stood up slowly and grabbed the small flashlight I kept by the couch. My phone still showed no service. I hesitated for a long time before walking toward the door. When I got close, I called out, "Hello, who's there?" Nothing. I listened hard, but there was only the rain. Then, soft as a whisper, came a voice. "Please, help me." It sounded like a man's voice, hoarse, weak, maybe injured. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Every instinct told me not to open it, but something in the voice, the desperation, made me pause. I flipped on the porch light. The bulb buzzed and flickered, throwing a dim yellow glow across the porch. There was no one there. Just empty rain. I slowly cracked the door open, leaning out a few inches, rain splattering across the floorboards. I shined the flashlight out into the yard. Hello? The beam caught the rain, then swept across the trees. Nothing. No one. I was about to shut the door when I saw them. Muddy footprints. Fresh. Leading from the edge of the porch steps to the middle of the yard where they just stopped. No return prints. No continuation. Just ended, as if whoever made them had vanished into thin air. A deep, cold unease settled in my chest. I closed the door, locked it, and backed away slowly. The knocking came again, this time from the back door. I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs. The back door led to a small porch overlooking the woods. I crept toward it, the sound of the rain hammering louder than ever. Another knock. 3 slow taps, perfectly spaced. Then that same voice. Please, let me in. It was closer this time, clearer. I didn't move. Please. It's cold. My flashlight shook in my hand. I aimed it toward the back window beside the door. And that's when I saw him. He was standing right outside, his face pressed against the glass. His eyes were wide, glassy, and colorless. His mouth moved slightly, whispering something I couldn't hear through the noise of the storm. His skin was so pale it looked gray under the porch light. His hair was plastered to his forehead, his clothes soaked through. Then I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. He wasn't wet from rain. He was dripping something darker, thicker. Blood. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. When I looked back, he was gone. I ran to the bedroom, slammed the door, and crouched beside the bed. I didn't dare move. I just sat there, shaking, listening. For a few minutes, there was nothing but the storm. Then came another sound. Soft, scraping, moving along the wall outside. He was circling the cabin. Every few seconds, the sound of his dragging footsteps paused, followed by a wet thump, like he was pressing his hand against the siding as he went. He circled the cabin 3 times. Then it stopped. I waited for what felt like an hour before I finally gathered the courage to look. The storm had quieted a little, the thunder distant now. I peeked through the blinds of the front window. At first, I didn't see anything. Then the porch light flickered again, and he was standing there, right in front of the door. No movement, just staring up at the house. His face was still expressionless, his hands hanging at his sides. Then, slowly, he raised one arm and pointed directly at the window where I stood. My breath caught. I ducked down instantly, trembling. Then I heard it. His voice again, this time closer, clearer, as if he were right next to me. Please, let me in. I didn't move. After that, everything went quiet. No knocking, no footsteps, not even the sound of the rain. Just silence. I must have passed out eventually because when I woke up, it was morning. The rain had stopped, and sunlight was streaming through the cracks in the blinds. I ran outside immediately. The ground was still soaked, but there were no footprints, no sign of anyone, just the faint smell of wet iron in the air. That afternoon, Hal came by to check on the property. I told him everything, the knocking, the man, the voice. He listened quietly, then nodded. Yeah, he said after a long pause. You're not the first to hear him. I stared at him. What are you talking about? He rubbed the back of his neck. Old story around here. Back in the 80s, a hiker went missing in those woods. Big storm rolled through, just like this one. Search parties found his camp washed out and a trail of footprints leading down this road. They stopped right about where your driveway is now. Folks say he still wanders the area during storms, comes up to houses asking to come inside. He looked at me hard. Whatever you do, if you ever hear him again, don't open the door. That was 3 years ago. I moved out a few weeks later, but sometimes when it rains hard at night, I still wake up with that voice echoing in my head, soft, almost pleading. Please, let me in. Story the end. The rain had been falling since late afternoon, slow at first and then steady, heavy, and endless. The kind of rain that blurred everything. The streets, the headlights, even your thoughts. I left work later than usual that night, pulling my hood up as I jogged across the parking lot toward my car. The lot lights shimmered on the wet pavement, reflecting in puddles that looked like sheets of glass. It was already pitch dark by the time I pulled out, the wipers squealing rhythmically as they pushed the water aside. The drive home was usually a quiet 20 minutes through town and then down a long stretch of road cutting through the woods. That road always made me uneasy at night. The trees leaned close, their branches hanging low, and when it rained, fog would rise from the ground, thick and ghostly. But it was the fastest route home, and I'd driven it so many times I could probably do it blindfolded. About 10 minutes in, I saw something on the shoulder up ahead. Through the blur of rain and headlights, I could just make out a figure, someone standing there in the downpour facing the road. My first thought was that it was some poor driver whose car had broken down. There weren't many houses out there, and there sure as hell weren't any sidewalks. As I got closer, I could tell it was a woman. She was wearing a long white dress that clung to her from the rain, her hair plastered against her face. She wasn't waving or signaling, just standing there, completely still. I slowed down, rolling the window down just enough to yell out, "You okay?" I called over the hiss of rain. She didn't respond, didn't even move. The wind howled, blowing sheets of rain across the windshield. I could barely see her now, just a pale shape against the darkness. Something about the way she stood there, rigid, unmoving, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I hesitated, my hand on the gear shift, ready to drive off. Then, for some reason I can't explain, guilt kicked in. I sighed, opened the passenger door, and called again. "Hey, you need a ride?" That's when she turned her head. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and wide, and even through the rain I could see that her lips were trembling. She looked terrified, like something had been chasing her. Without saying a word, she climbed into the truck, soaking the seat instantly. Her hands shook violently as she held them together in her lap. "Jesus," I muttered. "You're freezing. What happened?" She stared ahead for a few seconds, then said quietly, "My car went off the road." I looked around, but there was no sign of another vehicle, no flashing hazards, nothing but trees and darkness. "Where?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. "Back there," she finally said, her voice trembling. I started driving slowly, glancing in the rearview mirror. "We should call for help. You hurt?" She shook her head. "No, I needed to get out." "Out of the car?" Her lips pressed together. "Out of there," she whispered. I looked at her again. Her skin was so pale it almost glowed in the dashboard light. Her eyes darted to the window like she expected something to appear out of the rain. "What were you doing out here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Visiting," she said. "I used to live near here." I nodded, not sure what to say. "It's a bad night to be driving this road," I said. "It floods pretty bad." "I know," she said softly. "It always does." The way she said it, it didn't sound like small talk. It sounded like memory. As we drove, I noticed she kept glancing over her shoulder like she was afraid of something behind us. Once, when lightning flashed, she flinched so hard that her whole body jerked. "Hey," I said, "you sure you're okay?" Her eyes flicked toward me, and for just a second, there was something hollow in them. "He's still there," she said quietly. "Who?" She didn't answer. I glanced at the rearview mirror again, half expecting to see someone following us through the rain. But there was nothing, just endless wet roads stretching into blackness. We drove for maybe 10 minutes in silence. Then she pointed suddenly. "Turn here." The road she pointed to was almost invisible, just a narrow dirt path washed out by the rain. I hesitated. "You sure? That looks like it goes into the woods." She nodded. "It does." The trees closed in around us as I turned. The headlights cut through the fog, showing only flashes of mud and trunks. The sound of rain on the roof was deafening now. After a while, a small clearing opened up ahead. In the middle of it stood a house, or what was left of one. It was little more than a skeleton of rotted wood and collapsed roof, half swallowed by the forest. "This it?" I asked. "Yes," she said. I slowed to a stop. "You live here?" She turned her head toward me slowly. "I did," she said softly. The words sent a chill through me. I looked at her again, and that's when I noticed something. Her dress wasn't just wet. It was torn, smeared with what looked like dirt or ash, and there were small, dark spots near the hem that could have been blood. "You okay?" I asked again, my voice shaking slightly. She smiled faintly, but her eyes stayed sad. "Thank you for the ride," she said. "You should go now." "Wait," I said. "You can't stay out here." She reached for the door handle. "Please," she said, her voice urgent now. "Go before he sees you too." The way she said it made my stomach twist. I didn't move. "Before who sees me?" She looked at me for a long second, then opened the door and stepped out into the rain. I watched as she walked toward the ruins of the house, her figure fading into the storm. Then, lightning flashed, and in that split second of white light, I saw her clearly, standing on the collapsed porch. Only. She wasn't standing. She was floating just above the ground, her dress rippling in the wind. The light faded, and she was gone. I drove home as fast as I could, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't tell Amanda about it when I got home. She already thought I had too many late-night ghost stories from working alone. But I couldn't stop thinking about that woman's face, her voice, and the way she said, "Before he sees you too." 2 days later, the sheriff came into the diner where I sometimes ate breakfast before work. He was talking to the waitress about an accident off that same road, a car they'd found half buried in mud down a ravine. A woman had crashed there during a storm years ago. She died instantly. Her name was Claire Madden, and she had lived near Pine Hollow. When I asked him how long ago it happened, he said it was 15 years. That night, it rained again. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of water dripping somewhere in the house. I got up, thinking it was just a leak in the roof. But when I walked into the living room, I saw it. Wet footprints leading from the front door to the hallway. Bare footprints. Small, like a woman's. I followed them down the hall, heart hammering, until they stopped right in front of the back door. The door was closed, but there was a faint outline of a handprint on the glass. Lightning flashed, and for a moment I saw her outside. Standing in the rain again, soaked, white dress clinging to her, staring at me through the window, and behind her, just barely visible, was a shadow. Taller, broader, standing right behind her. Then the light faded, and they were gone. The next morning, I found a single muddy footprint on the porch, facing away from the door, leading back toward the woods. I never took that road again. But sometimes on stormy nights, when the rain beats against the windows and the lightning flickers, I swear I see her standing by the tree line, watching, waiting, and I always remember her last words, "Before he sees you too." Story the end. It was a Friday evening in late October, and the rain had been falling steadily all day, turning the streets of upstate New York into slick, reflective sheets of water. I was driving home from a friend's house, a little tired, a little buzzed from the whiskey we had shared. I didn't usually take this shortcut, but the GPS insisted that cutting through Hollow Creek Road would save me 20 minutes. Hollow Creek was one of those roads people always whispered about. Old, winding, lined with thick forests that blocked out the sky even during the day. I'd driven it once or twice before and remembered it as unnerving, but this time the rain made it worse. Each puddle looked like a mirror, distorting the yellow lines that barely showed through the darkness. About halfway down the road, I saw it. A figure standing by the side of the road, soaking wet, wearing what looked like an old, dark coat. At first, I thought it was someone hitchhiking, but the figure wasn't moving. I slowed down, rolled the window halfway, and called out, "Hey, are you okay?" Nothing. I tried again, louder. "Do you need help?" Still nothing. The figure remained frozen, its head slightly tilted as if watching me. A shiver ran down my spine. Normally, I would have driven past, but something made me stop. Maybe it was the unease, or maybe I felt compelled to see who it was. I pulled over to the shoulder, rain splashing against the tires, and stepped out of the car. The wind and rain whipped at my coat, soaking me instantly. The figure didn't move, just stayed there, silently staring. I squinted through the downpour and realized something strange. The figure had no discernible face, just a dark, wet void where a face should have been. "Hello," I shouted, my voice cracking. No response. I stepped closer, and the ground beneath my boots squelched with mud. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt, like the forest itself was pressing down on me. That's when I noticed the sound, faint, soft, almost imperceptible at first, like someone dragging a chain across the wet asphalt. I froze. The figure tilted its head again, and the dragging sound grew louder, moving around the trees behind it. My stomach dropped. Something wasn't right. I turned back toward my car. My keys were in the ignition, the engine off. When I reached it, I realized my phone had died. No signal, no light. I fumbled in the glove compartment for a flashlight and finally got it on, the beam cutting through the downpour. The figure was gone. I blinked, shaking my head. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it had been a trick of the light. I tried to tell myself that as I climbed into the car and locked the doors, then I heard it, a faint tapping on the roof. I froze, gripping the steering wheel. The sound was deliberate. Tap, 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 slow and methodical, coming from directly above me. My heart was hammering. I tried to start the car, but the engine only turned over once, then died. I looked up through the windshield. Nothing. Just the rain. I opened the door and stepped out, convinced maybe something had fallen from a tree. The ground was empty, save for puddles reflecting the dim glow of my flashlight. I shined it around frantically, and that's when I saw the footprints. They were huge, human-shaped, but irregular, like the person who made them wasn't walking in a normal way. They led from the edge of the road into the trees, disappearing into the darkness. I stepped back into the car, my hands shaking. That's when I noticed movement in the trees, too slow, too deliberate. A shape emerged from the forest, tall, soaking wet, a dark coat clinging to its frame. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle as it walked toward me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I jammed the keys in the ignition again, and the car finally roared to life. I floored it, tires spinning, mud spraying everywhere. The figure stayed at the edge of the road, watching, unmoving, until I disappeared around a bend. I didn't slow down until I reached the first gas station in town, heart pounding, soaked through, and gasping for air. The attendant gave me a strange look as I stumbled inside, but I couldn't speak. I just held out my keys, hoping to explain. When I drove back to Hollow Creek the next morning, in the daylight, the road was empty. There were no footprints, no puddles deep enough to leave marks, no sign of the figure at all. The forest looked ordinary, almost mundane. People said the road was deserted at night. Some even claimed that anyone who stopped to help never came back, but I didn't believe it. At least I didn't think I would. Weeks later, after the rain had stopped and the roads had dried, I saw a news article about a missing hiker, a man last seen walking alone in the forests near Hollow Creek. The description matched the figure I'd seen. Tall, dark coat, completely soaked. The article mentioned that the search team had found no tracks, no belongings, nothing except his footprints ending abruptly near the road. I stopped driving that shortcut at night after that. I take the long route now, even if it adds 30 minutes to my commute. And every time it rains, I find myself double-checking the rearview mirror, scanning the edges of the trees for something that might be standing there, waiting. Sometimes in heavy storms, I swear I can hear the faint tapping again. Tap, tap, as if someone is still circling, still following, still watching. Story the end. It started as a drizzle, the kind that made the asphalt glisten under the dim glow of streetlights. I remember pulling my coat tighter around me, trying to ignore the chill that crept through my bones. I had just left work late at a law office in downtown Milwaukee, the rain already soaking through the thin fabric of my blazer, my umbrella having collapsed in the wind an hour earlier. The streets were nearly empty, which wasn't unusual for a Thursday night past 10, but the quiet felt heavier than usual, like the city was holding its breath. I remember telling myself to relax, that I'd been walking home in the rain countless times before. But this night felt different. I had opted to take a shortcut through an alley to avoid the longer route along the main avenue. The alley wasn't particularly sinister, just lined with brick walls, dumpsters, and flickering lights, but there was a feeling about it, something you can't really explain. It was the way shadows seemed to twist unnaturally when the street lamp buzzed above, the way a puddle reflected not just my figure, but something else lurking behind it. I shook my head and forced a laugh, thinking I was imagining things. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe the long hours at work had frayed my nerves. As I walked, the sound of my footsteps echoed off the brick walls, a hollow rhythm that seemed to follow me. That's when I noticed it, a faint dragging sound behind me like wet shoes scraping against concrete. I stopped and held my breath. Nothing. Just the rain hitting the alley. I started walking again, a little faster this time, and the sound returned, deliberate and slow, always matching my pace. My pulse started to quicken. I glanced over my shoulder but saw nothing. The alley was empty except for the shadows and the rain-slicked ground. I tried to rationalize it. Someone else walking behind me? A delivery guy late for a shift? Maybe. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the sound was too precise, too intentional, too close. I started breaking into a jog, my coat flapping around me, the rain stinging my face. The footsteps didn't speed up. They stayed right behind me, methodical. Panic began to rise in my chest. I didn't have my phone on me. I'd left it charging at my desk. My only thought was to get out of the alley, to reach the street and the safety of the main road. At the end of the alley, the streetlights cast long, distorted shadows across the wet pavement. I pushed myself harder, sprinting now, heart hammering in my chest. That's when I heard a voice, low and guttural, almost a whisper, carried over the rain. "Don't run." I froze mid-step, the words sinking into my bones. I scanned the street, but no one was there. The voice came again, closer this time, seemingly from right behind me. "Stop." I turned, my eyes straining to pierce the darkness. The alley was empty. The street beyond was empty. Only the rain and the echo of my heartbeat filled the air. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, and started moving again, slower this time, cautiously, ears straining for any sound. Then I saw it. A figure, barely visible, standing in the alley just behind me. It was hunched, its head low, shoulders shaking slightly as if it were breathing heavily. The figure didn't move toward me, didn't retreat. It just stood there, watching, waiting. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. The rain was coming down harder now, blurring the edges of the figure, making it almost ghost-like. My instincts told me to scream, to do something, but my throat was frozen. And then the voice came again, unmistakably human, yet impossibly cold. "You shouldn't be here." Something inside me snapped. I bolted. I ran into the street, slipping in the rain, yet heart thundering, lungs burning. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I reached a 24-hour diner on the corner, its neon lights cutting through the dark and the rain. I pushed through the door, dripping wet, and collapsed onto a booth seat. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with a kind face, looked at me like I was crazy. "Rough night?" she asked. I nodded, shivering, unable to speak. She poured me a cup of coffee, and I stared out the window at the rain, trying to convince myself it had all been my imagination. I didn't tell anyone that night. I didn't tell my friends. I didn't tell my parents. I just wanted to put it behind me, to pretend it hadn't happened. But the memory clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Every time it rained, my pulse would spike. My eyes would dart to every dark corner, every alley, every shadowed doorway. A few weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I walked the same route again during daylight. The alley was unremarkable, just bricks, dumpsters, and the occasional flickering street lamp. No figure, no footsteps, no whispering voice. I laughed nervously to myself, calling it an overactive imagination, stress, maybe even some leftover adrenaline from a late night. But that relief was short-lived. It happened again, only this time it was closer to home. One night, I was driving back from a late dinner at a friend's house in West Allis. The rain was relentless, streaking across the windshield, wipers struggling to keep up. My headlights caught a figure standing by the side of the road. A man, drenched, wearing what looked like a long coat, hunched over slightly. I slowed down, assuming he needed help. As I rolled down the window, preparing to ask if he needed a ride, he lifted his head. There was no face, just darkness. The rain seemed to pool in the hollow where his features should have been. I slammed the window shut, heart pounding, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wanted to drive away, but I felt frozen. Then he moved. Not toward me, not away, but in a way that defied logic. His body twisted, contorted, and yet he stayed perfectly upright. The shadows of the rain seemed to bend around him, almost shielding him, making it impossible to see the ground beneath him. My mind raced. Was it a person? A hallucination? A trick of the rain and headlights? I floored it, tires spinning on the wet asphalt, and didn't stop until I pulled into my driveway. I didn't even get out of the car immediately. I sat there, drenched, shaking, staring at the empty street. When I finally dared to step outside, the figure was gone, leaving only puddles and the smell of wet concrete in the air. After that, I started avoiding rain at night altogether. I took taxis, I stayed late at work until the rain stopped. I even considered moving. But the encounters kept happening, always at night, always in heavy rain, always fleeting, always leaving me questioning my sanity. One night, about 2 months after the first alley incident, I was walking my dog, a small, scrappy terrier named Max, through a neighborhood park. It had been raining all evening, turning the pathways into rivers of mud. I had Max on a leash, trying to ignore the cold that seeped through my jacket when I heard it. The soft, dragging sound again. I froze, instinctively gripping Max's leash. The sound was coming from behind the trees, just beyond the path. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a branch fell. Maybe some other dog was nearby. But then I saw it. The same hunched figure, just beyond the tree line, watching us. The shadows clung to it, making it impossible to see details, but I could feel its gaze, like icy fingers running down my spine. Max growled, low and threatening. The figure tilted its head in response, and then the voice came again, soft and deliberate. Leave. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran, Max yanking against the leash, almost pulling me off my feet. The rain soaked me to the bone, the sound of my own ragged breathing loud in my ears. When I finally reached my front door, I slammed it shut behind me, locked every lock, and leaned against it, gasping. Max was shaking beside me, ears flat, eyes wide. The next morning, I told a friend about it. She was skeptical, naturally, but she listened. I described the alley, the figure, the voice. She didn't laugh, didn't dismiss me outright, but she did ask one question that chilled me to the core. Have you seen anyone else, anyone alive, acting strange around those areas? Anyone you don't remember seeing before? I thought about it. The truth is, I hadn't noticed anyone. But now, thinking back, I realized there were subtle things I had ignored. The way a stranger in the park would vanish when I looked directly at them. The way a passerby would move too smoothly, too unnaturally, almost like they were gliding. Small things. Things I had chalked up to imagination. Months passed. I moved to a new apartment closer to work. The encounters lessened but never stopped completely. Every time it rained, I felt eyes on me, a presence just behind the curtain of water. Watching, waiting. Sometimes I'd hear that dragging sound in my apartment building's hallway or catch a glimpse of movement in the reflection of the wet streets. Always subtle, never fully clear. One evening, a particularly heavy storm rolled in. I was driving home on I-94, headlights slicing through the rain, windshield wipers barely keeping up. I glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. There it was. The figure standing on the shoulder of the highway, hunched and silent, completely still despite the downpour and the cars rushing past. I blinked, and it was gone. I stopped at a gas station, my hands shaking, coffee trembling in my grip. An older man behind the counter noticed. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, half joking. I didn't answer. I couldn't. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the rain pound against my window, I realized the terrifying truth. This wasn't about specific places or moments. It wasn't about alleys or highways or parks. It was about the rain. It was about the wet, the darkness, and the way shadows move when no one is looking. I'd been lucky, I thought. So far, it had only watched, only whispered, only chased me for short bursts. But I knew, deep down, that it was patient. It was waiting for the moment when I was alone, when the rain would be thickest, when I would be most vulnerable. Since then, I've made a rule. I never go out in heavy rain at night. I avoid alleys. I avoid empty streets. I never walk alone after dark if it's raining. And every time the weather turns stormy, every time the sky opens up and the world is drowned in water, I feel it again. The dragging sound, the whisper, the presence just out of sight, watching, always watching. Sometimes, in the darkest, wettest nights, I swear I can hear it right outside my window, moving across the wet pavement, waiting. And I know it's only a matter of time before the patience runs out. Story the end. It had been raining for 3 days straight in southern Kentucky, the kind of steady, cold downpour that turns every roadside ditch into a shallow river and fills the night air with a low, endless hiss. By the third evening, most people in town had hunkered down indoors, their driveways glistening under the amber glow of porch lights. I was driving home from work late that night, sometime around 11. My route wound through the outskirts of town, a rural stretch of cracked asphalt bordered by forest and farmland. I'd taken that road nearly every day for years, and though it was lonely and dark, I never thought twice about it, until that night. The rain was heavier than usual, blurring everything beyond the reach of my headlights. My wipers struggled to keep the windshield clear, making a rhythmic squeak that became oddly hypnotic after a while. I remember glancing at the gas gauge and realizing I'd forgotten to fill up earlier. The needle hovered just above empty. I told myself I'd make it to the 24-hour station about 5 miles ahead, but the road seemed longer than I remembered. About 2 miles out from town, the rain picked up, pounding on the roof like gravel. That's when I saw it, a figure standing on the shoulder of the road, completely drenched. I slowed down, my headlights revealing what looked like a man in a faded flannel shirt and jeans, his back turned toward me. He was facing the woods, his arms hanging limply at his sides. For a second, I debated whether to stop. It wasn't unusual to see someone walking along the road, but this was the middle of nowhere, and in weather like that, it didn't make sense. I rolled down the window slightly, calling out, "Hey, you need a ride?" No response. He didn't move or even glance at me, just stood there, head slightly tilted, rain streaming off his soaked clothes. Something about the way he was standing, rigid, unnatural, made the hair on my arms rise. I hesitated, then decided to drive on. I figured maybe he lived nearby or was waiting for someone. A few minutes later, as I rounded a curve bordered by trees on both sides, I felt my stomach drop. There he was again. Same flannel shirt, same posture, standing by the road, motionless, facing the woods. I slammed the brakes for a moment, staring through the rain-smeared glass. There was no way. I hadn't seen any turnoffs, no paths he could have taken to beat me there. I drove past, my heart pounding, and checked the rearview mirror. But in the darkness and rain, the spot where he'd been was empty. By the time I reached the gas station, I was shaken. The place was quiet, just one old pickup truck parked near the convenience store's entrance. I got out, pulling my jacket tight against the rain, and hurried inside. The fluorescent lights felt harsh after the dim, stormy drive. The cashier, a tired-looking man in his 50s, nodded at me. "Rough night out there," he said. "Yeah," I muttered, glancing toward the windows. The rain was hammering the glass so hard it looked like static. "You ever see anyone walking out on Route 9 at night?" He frowned. "Not often." "Why?" I told him what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen. As I talked, his expression changed. He didn't laugh or shrug it off like I expected. He just looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, "You said flannel shirt? Kinda red and black?" "Yeah." He exhaled slowly. "Son, you need to be careful on that road. You probably don't know, but about 10 years ago, a guy named Mark Henson got hit and killed out there during a storm just like this one. He was wearing a red flannel shirt. The driver said he didn't even see him until it was too late." I stared at him. "You're saying that was him?" He shrugged, but there was something uneasy in his eyes. "All I know is folks around here have seen strange things out there on rainy nights. Always the same description, same spot, same road." I didn't say anything else. I just paid for my gas, filled up, and tried to shake it off as coincidence. When I got back in the car, I checked my mirrors again, half expecting to see a figure standing by the pumps. Nothing. Just the endless rain. I drove the rest of the way home with the radio on, trying to fill the silence. My mind kept going back to how fast the man would have had to move to appear where he did. It didn't make sense. I reached my driveway around midnight. My house sat at the edge of a wooded property. Peaceful most days, but that night it felt isolated. The rain had softened the ground into thick mud, and by the time I reached the porch, my shoes were soaked. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, relieved to hear the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock in the hallway. Everything was normal. I hung my jacket by the door and went to take a shower, trying to wash the tension off. But when I got out, I noticed something odd. The front door was cracked open. I was sure I'd shut it. I remembered the sound of it clicking closed. My heart started pounding as I slowly approached. Rain blew in through the gap, soaking the welcome mat. I called out, "Hello," even though I knew how stupid it sounded. No answer. I closed and locked the door, then checked the windows. All locked. Nothing seemed out of place. I told myself the wind probably blew it open somehow. I sat down in the living room, turned on the TV for noise, and tried to calm down. It was after 1 when I decided to head to bed. The rain had gotten heavier again, rattling against the roof. I lay there listening, eyes half closed, when I heard it, a faint knock. Not on the front door, on the window. It was soft, almost hesitant, like someone tapping with their fingernails. I froze. My bedroom window faced the backyard, and there was no porch or overhang, just open ground. I waited, every muscle tense. Then it came again, 3 deliberate taps. I forced myself to get up. My first thought was that maybe a branch was hitting the glass, but when I pulled the curtain aside, I felt my throat tighten. Someone was standing there. It was hard to see clearly through the rain, but I could make out the soaked flannel shirt plastered to his chest, his face pale and indistinct in the darkness. He was just staring, not moving, not blinking. I stumbled back, heart pounding, and fumbled for my phone. By the time I turned the screen on and looked again, he was gone. I called the police. 2 deputies came out about 20 minutes later. By then, there was no sign of anyone outside, just muddy footprints leading from the tree line toward the house and stopping right under my window. They searched the yard and the woods, but didn't find anything. One of the deputies, a tall woman with rain dripping from her hat, looked uneasy when I described the man's clothes. "You're not the first to see him," she said quietly. "Usually happens on nights like this. People driving through, folks living nearby, they all say the same thing. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound of wind or rain felt like footsteps outside." Over the next few weeks, I tried to forget it, but something about the experience clung to me. Not just fear, but the sense that he hadn't just been on the road. He'd followed me home. A month later, another storm rolled through. I was on edge from the moment it started. Around 10 p.m., as I was getting ready for bed, I thought I heard movement outside again. Slow, dragging steps on the wet ground. I turned off all the lights and stood by the window, heart hammering. And then, through the sheets of rain, I saw him, standing by the edge of the woods again, that same flannel shirt, head tilted toward me. Me. Watching. Only this time there was something different. The way he stood, slightly hunched, like his bones couldn't quite hold him upright. The rain passed through him like mist, and when lightning flashed, I swear I could see the faint outline of the trees through him. I didn't move. Couldn't. He raised one arm, slow, trembling, and pointed straight at the road. Then he was gone. No fade, no step. Just gone. After that night, I started digging into what happened to Mark Henson. Turns out he'd been walking home from the same gas station I'd stopped at when he died. The driver who hit him claimed Mark was standing in the middle of the road, facing away from traffic, just like I'd seen him. I found his obituary online. The photo showed a man with a kind face, brown hair, and a faint smile, wearing that same red flannel shirt. I moved out of that house the following spring, sold it to a young couple who said they didn't mind the isolation. I didn't tell them anything. But sometimes, when I pass through that part of Kentucky and the rain starts to fall, I catch myself glancing at the roadside, half expecting to see him standing there again, still waiting, still pointing toward the place where he died. And I know deep down that if I ever do stop again, he won't let me drive away this time. Story the end. The rain started before I even got to the highway. It was one of those early October evenings where the sky hangs low and the clouds are a thick, unbroken gray. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual as I drove out of the city toward my parents' house in the Pennsylvania countryside. I was alone. My apartment in Philadelphia had been quiet for months since my roommate moved out, and I thought a night away from the city might help me shake the creeping sense of unease that had been building over the past few weeks. At first, the rain was just a drizzle, the kind that blurs the lines between streetlights and shadows. But as I drove north, it turned into sheets of water so heavy that my windshield wipers barely kept up. I slowed down, my headlights cutting through the gloom, illuminating patches of wet asphalt and the occasional deer frozen on the side of the road. There's a part of Pennsylvania just beyond the last suburbs where the forests feel endless, and the road winds like it doesn't really go anywhere. I've driven it hundreds of times, but tonight it felt like it was closing in around me. About an hour in, I passed a small, abandoned gas station on the left. The windows were dark, the pumps rusted over. Something about it caught my attention, like a motion in the corner of my eye, but when I glanced over, there was nothing. I shook it off and focused on the road. A mile later, I noticed headlights behind me. They were far at first, but then they came closer, too close. A dark SUV, its high beams on, pressed right up against me as if it wanted to pass, but there wasn't space. The highway was wet and slick, the trees pressing in from both sides. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror. The driver wasn't moving over. I felt my pulse spike. Something didn't feel right. I tapped the brakes lightly, hoping they would pass, but they stayed behind me, matching my speed. Panic started to rise. I considered pulling off at the next rest stop, but the rain was so heavy that it had started turning the lines on the road into blurry streaks. I didn't know if I could even see well enough to stop safely. Then, as if to confirm my fear, the SUV flashed its high beams directly at me. The glare made it impossible to see, and I swerved slightly, my heart pounding. I muttered under my breath, come on, just let me get to my parents' house." I took the next curve a little faster than I should have, hoping the vehicle behind me would lose me in the turns, but it stayed. That's when I noticed something strange. Every time I passed a stretch of road that had a streetlight, the SUV seemed to disappear. Only when I was back in the darkness did it reappear, almost like it was waiting for me to drop my guard. I started to feel like I was in a trap, like the night itself had eyes. At one point, I saw a set of cabins off to the right, tucked back into the woods. I thought about pulling in there, maybe calling the cops from a safer spot. But the cabins were empty, or at least they looked that way. The lights were off, doors shuttered. I kept driving, my phone clutched in my hand, scrolling for a signal. Nothing. Not a bar, not even a flicker of reception. I tried to calm myself, telling myself that I'd probably just imagined the SUV's behavior, that it was just someone being careless or aggressive in the rain. But then I heard it, a tap, tap, tap against my car. I froze. The sound was faint at first, almost rhythmic, like someone running their fingernails against the roof. My mind tried to rationalize the rain hitting the car, a branch brushing against it, but the sound persisted. Tap, 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 slower now. Deliberate. I looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing. Just the dark shape of the SUV a little behind me, still too close, still waiting. My chest tightened. I gripped the wheel harder and told myself to focus on driving. The road started to narrow, the trees pressing even closer. It was just past 10 p.m., and I was completely alone except for the SUV that wouldn't leave me alone. Then I saw a figure, standing in the middle of the road, arms outstretched, just far enough ahead that I had to brake hard to avoid hitting them. My car skidded slightly on the slick asphalt, and I could hear the tires protesting. The figure didn't move as I passed. In the darkness, I thought I saw their face. It was pale, almost glowing in the rain, features blurred but horrifyingly human. My stomach turned over, and I slammed my foot down on the accelerator, heart pounding. The SUV followed me closely, flashing its lights, and I realized something. It wasn't just aggressive driving. They were guiding me, forcing me down this stretch of road. I kept driving faster, the rain hammering down, visibility almost zero. My mind raced. I thought about turning around, about pulling over into the trees, but fear had frozen me. I only wanted to get to somewhere safe. I remembered my parents' house, only another 20 minutes up the road, tucked into a small clearing surrounded by woods. I imagined the lights on inside, the warmth, the safety. I needed to get there. Then I saw another figure. This one was on the shoulder, partially hidden behind a tree, but I could see the outline of a person in a hooded jacket, standing completely still. My heart skipped. I swerved slightly, missing them by inches. At that moment, the SUV flashed its lights again, and I realized it had pulled up alongside me for just a second. In that instant, I caught a glimpse of the driver. There was no face, or at least none I could make out, just darkness, a shadow where a face should be. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I was trapped on this narrow stretch of highway. I finally reached a small town just off the highway. The rain was still relentless, but at least there were streetlights, houses, and a few cars parked along the streets. The SUV was gone, and I exhaled in relief, trying to shake the numbness creeping over me. I pulled into a gas station, drenched, hands trembling, and ran inside to call my parents. As I recounted the story, the attendant behind the counter looked at me with wide eyes. "You're lucky to be alive," he said quietly. "That road, people don't go up there at night in the rain, not alone." I didn't sleep that night. My parents kept checking the locks, and I kept imagining the shadowed figure in the SUV, wondering if they had followed me after all. The next morning, in the daylight, the road looked harmless, just asphalt, trees, and puddles reflecting the pale sun. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew that rain can turn familiar roads into something unrecognizable, something dangerous. A week later, I drove back to that same stretch in daylight to see if I could make sense of what happened. There was no gas station, no abandoned cabins, no sign of anyone waiting in the road, but then I noticed something carved into a tree just off the highway. A simple message, nearly hidden under moss. It said, "Stay in the light." My stomach sank. I snapped a photo and left immediately, feeling watched the whole way back. I couldn't stop thinking about the SUV either. I asked around town, and some locals mentioned rumors of a car that follows drivers at night during heavy storms. Nobody ever knows who's inside or why they follow, but it's said that if they catch your attention, the road becomes a trap. You can't leave until you reach the edge of the forest or the first town with lights. Some people say it's ghosts, others say it's just some psychopath taking advantage of poor visibility. I don't know what it was, but I know it was real. I felt it. I smelled the wet asphalt and the cold air that carried something wrong. After that night, I never drove that road in the rain again. I avoid it even on clear days if I can. There are times when I hear a car behind me on quiet roads, tapping lights or skimming close in the mirror, and my heart skips a beat. I think back to that night often, especially when it rains. I can still feel the cold spray of water on my face, hear the rhythmic tap of something on the roof of my car, and see the pale figure standing in the road, unblinking, waiting. It's been years now, but the memory hasn't faded. Rain has a way of hiding shadows, of turning normal things into something else entirely. And that night, the rain was more than just weather. It was a warning. People think they're safe driving alone, even in storms, but sometimes the danger isn't visible until it's too late. I've talked to others who've driven that road, who've felt the SUV behind them, who've glimpsed shadows in the trees. Some of them never make it to the next town. Some swear they see a figure in the middle of the road, arms outstretched, face pale and wet, always watching. I know now that there are parts of the country where the rain doesn't just fall, it follows you, it guides you, it hides what's really out there. I don't know what would have happened if I had swerved into the woods that night, or if I had tried to outrun the SUV. I don't want to know. I only know the fear I felt, the way the darkness seemed to press in from all sides, the way the rain made every shadow alive. My parents don't like me talking about it. They say it's just my imagination, stress from work, the rain playing tricks. But I know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. And every time it rains now, I remember. Every time the night is dark and wet, I feel it again. The presence that waits, the vehicle that follows, and the figure that stands in the road, never moving, never blinking, just watching. It's the kind of thing that changes you. You start driving slower, scanning every shadow, every curve in the road. You trust nothing, not even the familiar. And worst of all, you realize that some things, once seen in the rain, never really leave you. Story the end. The rain had been falling for hours, relentless and cold, the kind that seemed to seep into your bones no matter what you wore. In the outskirts of Cedar Falls, Iowa, it had been raining like that all week, and the small town streets had turned into streams of brown water. Most people stayed indoors, curled under blankets, drinking coffee or beer, watching the storm rage outside. But not Clara. Clara worked the night shift at a local diner, the kind of greasy spoon that stayed open for truckers, cops, and late-night wanderers. She had just finished cleaning up and was locking the doors when the storm hit its peak. By the time she stepped out to her car, the rain was pounding down like a curtain, and the wind had picked up so strongly it almost pushed her back inside. Her little Honda hatchback struggled along the slick roads. The headlights barely penetrated the sheets of water, reflecting off puddles so deep she had to slow down to a crawl. The usual 10-minute drive home felt like an eternity. Every tree along the roadside groaned and bent under the wind, and the shadows of the forest on either side seemed to twitch unnaturally. About halfway home, she saw something on the side of the road, a figure crouched under a tree, soaking wet. At first, she thought it was a homeless person or a hitchhiker caught in the storm. She slowed down and rolled the window down slightly. "Hey, you okay?" she shouted over the roar of the rain. The figure didn't respond. Closer now, she saw it was a man, young, skinny, shivering violently, eyes wide and staring blankly at the wet asphalt. His clothes were torn, soaked through, and mud streaked his pale skin. Clara's first instinct was to offer him a ride. Come on, get in, she said, unlocking the passenger side. He hesitated, then shuffled toward the car and climbed in without a word. She noticed his hands were trembling and his fingernails were blackened with dirt. His eyes darted around the car, not meeting hers. Where? Do you need to go? Clara asked. He whispered something she barely caught. Don't let it follow me. The words made her pause. Don't let what follow you? He didn't answer. He just hunched down, keeping his head low. Clara tried not to let her unease show. She had seen a lot of strange things on her late-night drives, but something about this man felt off. Not just wet and cold. Wrong. The road narrowed as it cut through the old forest on the outskirts of town. Clara kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone or something behind her. The headlights illuminated nothing but rain and dark trees, yet the feeling of being watched kept gnawing at her. Are you sure you're okay? She asked, trying to keep her voice calm. The man shook his head slightly. It's still out there. Clara swallowed. What's out there? He leaned forward suddenly, voice low and panicked. It doesn't like the light. Don't turn around. Keep driving. Her stomach tightened. Something about the intensity in his voice made her press the accelerator a little harder, even though the rain made the road slick. A few miles in, she saw a flash in her peripheral vision, a dark figure moving along the tree line. She nearly swerved. Did you see that? She shouted. The man grabbed her arm. Don't look. Just keep going. Her heart raced. She felt trapped between terror and disbelief. The storm, the forest, the wet stranger, all of it seemed unreal, like she had slipped into someone else's nightmare. She rounded a bend and the figure appeared again, closer this time, gliding along the edge of the road like it didn't touch the ground. Its outline was humanoid but distorted, tall and thin, the rain running down it in sheets but never dripping. Its face, or what she assumed was a face, was blank and pale. Clara screamed and slammed on the brakes. The man beside her shouted, "Keep driving, don't stop." She gunned the engine, tires skidding on the wet asphalt. The figure followed, keeping pace beside the car, moving unnaturally fast despite the slick road. Then, without warning, it vanished. Just like that, gone. Clara's breathing was ragged, her hands white on the steering wheel. The man let out a long, shaky breath, leaning back in his seat. They won't let it take me. Not yet, he said quietly. What is it? She asked, voice trembling. He shook his head, eyes wide with terror. It's not from here. Not really. I saw it in the woods first, waiting. Clara's mind raced. Saw it? Where? He pointed to a sharp turn ahead. The old logging trail. That's where it comes from. It waits in the rain. It feeds on people alone at night. The thought made Clara's stomach churn. She had driven these roads countless times, but tonight felt different. Alive, watching, hungry. They drove in tense silence for a while, the rain hammering the roof like drums. Every shadow seemed to flicker in her peripheral vision, every rustle in the trees amplified by the storm. She dared not look behind again. Finally, they reached a small bridge over a swollen creek. The man pointed across the water. You can leave me here. I can't. Are you kidding me? I'm not leaving you, Clara shouted. He shook his head. It'll follow. You can't help me. Go home. Just go. Clara hesitated, her hands shaking on the wheel. For a moment, the world felt still. Then, from the darkness beneath the bridge, a movement. Tall, impossibly thin, gliding above the water's surface, eyes glowing faintly red in the reflection of her headlights. Her stomach dropped. She realized this wasn't something you could fight. The man pushed the door open. Go! Don't stop for me! He vanished into the storm as she floored the accelerator, tires spinning on the wet road. She didn't look back. By the time she reached her neighborhood, the rain had lessened, but her hands were still shaking. She pulled into her driveway and stared at the darkened house. For a moment, she thought she saw the man standing under a tree at the edge of her yard, pale and wet, watching her. But when she blinked, he was gone. She locked every door, double-checked the windows, but sleep didn't come that night. Every sound, the creak of the house settling, the rustle of leaves, even the faint drip of rain from the gutters, made her flinch. A week later, she checked the news. Another report came in. A young man had gone missing along the old logging trail, last seen during a storm. They found his car abandoned, no footprints, no sign of struggle. Clara's stomach turned. She knew who it was. She could feel it. The rain returned that night, hard and unrelenting. Clara sat by her window, staring into the dark, watching the streets shimmer with water. She saw something moving in the distance, a figure standing under the street lamp at the end of her block. Pale, thin, and wet, watching, waiting. Her phone rang, making her jump. Caller ID was blank. She hesitated, then answered. A whisper came through, hoarse and ragged. "Don't let it follow me." She dropped the phone. Outside, the rain began to beat harder. Footsteps approached her front door, bare footsteps splashing in the water on her porch. Clara didn't move. She knew it wouldn't leave until it had her, just like it had the others. And the storm raged on. Story the end.